Hi, I'm Steve Towns, Deputy Chief Content Officer for Government Technology. Welcome to our Q&A with Jeff Brown from Google Cloud. Jeff is a strategic business executive for Google Cloud's public sector team focused on Google Workspace. He spent the last 9 years at Google Cloud working with public sector organizations to understand and adopt cloud technologies. He's been responsible for large-scale cloud transitions in the states of Colorado, Utah, Iowa, Arizona, and most recently, West Virginia. So, Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Steve, thank you very much for having me. It's good to see you again, by the way.
Absolutely.
Appreciate taking the time to talk with me.
Well, glad to have you here. I mean, this is a great time to be talking about cloud. I think government agencies, certainly turned to cloud to increase agility during the pandemic. But also security and disaster recovery are big parts of business continuity. Jeff, maybe we start there. Talk a little bit about the challenges government agencies are currently facing around business continuity and how the current threat environment and other factors have affected resiliency for state and local governments.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to start with a big one, right? So thanks for the question. And maybe just to make sure everybody's aware, when you hear continuity of operations, maybe what that means. I like to say it to friends and family. If you think about an insurance plan, right? You might have renters insurance, home insurance, car insurance. And so when you hear continuity of operations is, all right, well, what do public sector organizations, what do they have in place if should something happen, a security breach, right, an outage or other? And so, yeah, the question you asked is, hey, what are the challenges that at least I'm seeing or we're seeing? And the first thing I'd like to say is, if you kind of raise it up a level, it is really around the nature of what they're currently using today for their platform. And I think there's this perception, of course, that, fix that, patch that, and correct that, right? Just that's probably the easiest thing, and that would make sense. I totally get it. I think another big thing is that maybe it would appear too complex. What does that insurance plan look like? Explain that to me. Am I going to have two running platforms at the same time? Which leads to the third is a big one is, what I think for zero trust, if you think about emails and communications, and that it could be really difficult, and particularly last, that it can be expensive. So those are like the 3 to 4 reasons and challenges that I think they're facing today. And then I think just to add, maybe some other high level things that have happened, regardless of your party affiliation. If you look at the new administration that's come in DC, I mean, there are now mandates to federal agencies. You need to go do this seriously within the next 30, 60, 90 days. You have to show what you're doing when it comes to these type of cybersecurity attacks. And then that leads to another thing is just, VPNs and security and this compliance, and how do you go do that? And so I think that's a long answer to the question about what's currently happening with our public sector and what they're facing.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot happening around this issue in public sector. Certainly collaborating with cloud providers to ensure business continuity has become more important for government agencies. Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about how Google Cloud and Google Workspace can support continuity of operations within government?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say, first and foremost, if you think about that question of like, how does particularly Google work with our federal and state local agencies with continuity operations, I would answer very quickly with, it is a new narrative. This is a new discussion. So I don't want to act like, oh, we've been doing this for years and years and years. We've been doing platform changes and migrations and deployments, absolutely. But this new positioning with us is just that. Let's look at a very sincere, easy way for us to be an insurance plan, a continuity of operations plan, sitting in non-production behind their current platform, where the users are provisioned, even if it's just frontline or executives or those individuals that need to be able to get their job done today, would something happen. And so Google and the team have spent a lot of time doing just that. Let's build this new back-end continuity of operations so we can go to our customers and say, keep doing what you're doing today, but definitely leverage us again in this non-production manner that we can actually move over into production. That's the first play I would say. I think another thing to mention is that, no, I won't name the cities or counties, but when different things have happened over the years, it's interesting to see how people have adapted. And what I mean is essentially going to consumer accounts to get things done because maybe their work production has had something happen with it. And so that's the other thing for people to think about is that these solutions that are used by billions of people exist today on the cloud and are running. So if you think of personal Gmail, Maps, search, and that's another way for us to show you that it does exist today, and just leveraging that same infrastructure for your full-time employees, again, in a non-production manner, is another way to to look at this offerings that we provide.
So Jeff, that's interesting. So you can have tools like Google Workspace kind of waiting in the background in case you need to tap into them, in a disruptive event. What about the integrations? I mean, how can agencies take advantage of these kind of cloud collaboration tools, without rendering all their existing or legacy technologies obsolete?
So one way to look at this, and I think another, to use the term misconception, is that it's all not or nothing. And so part of your question is, what are your integrations? And I think a lot of people would be very surprised to know that there is, through a lot of Google engineering and development, Microsoft compatibility. So the ability for our Google Drive, our document repository, if you will, where we do our editors, where we can edit Microsoft in its native formats, number one. Number two, how about calendar interop? So the ability for one platform's calendar to see free busy of another, or the integration with Azure AD or Okta or Active Directory on premise or others. And so part of the question is, if I wanted to take advantage and maybe just keep email and calendar on a current platform, but use video conferencing and your real-time collaboration and maybe your mobile device management, and particularly your security solutions for data loss prevention and those things, there is the interoperability for us to do just that. In fact, even able to do data loss prevention and security on Microsoft formats themselves. And so the answer there is working with our customers to say, keep what's working and let's integrate through their interoperability, your coexistence of what we do today along with your current platform.
Okay, so you really can pick and choose the tools you want to use, and this will all fit together.
That's, that's better said.
Jeff, let's talk about the change management part, or the cultural transformation that comes along with helping agencies fully leverage cloud, right? It's always the people part that you need to pay attention to. Talk about some of the steps agencies can take to increase adoption and get their teams more comfortable with using these new tools and working in new ways.
So, another good thing to think about is this: if and it's going to sound a little bit, marketing, but just let me put it out there, because the question is change management. How would agencies look at adopting this? What does that look like? And so the first thing I just like to throw out there is, if you think of 8 or 9 solutions that Google has today, they're used by billions of people globally. So I'll say that again. Billions of people use Maps, use Search, use Chrome, use Gmail, use YouTube, right, et cetera, et cetera. So what's, again, hard for public sector sometimes leadership to understand is your full-time employees, your missions, the people you're serving, and particularly the constituents, they really are using these solutions today. So it's not as big as a shift as you think. Remember, going back, you just mentioned Microsoft compatibility, you have this interoperability. And so that's the way I'd like to frame the first part of answering this question. And then the second part is, over the years of doing this, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, Google, through our partners, have developed what is called a mutual evaluation plan and then an adoption methodology. The mutual evaluation plan is, think of a glorified statement of work, right? What's your infrastructure look like? What are the thousands of applications? Do you have mainframes? How do things connect? What are your mission critical services? Let's get a blueprint and map all those, and then show you how we would do migrations, whether it's coexistence or potentially, right, moving to our platform. But what I'd really like to highlight is that over doing this so many times, that that adoption methodology, the second part, is very specific training down to the individual, where you have to answer, Steve, I'm serious, these two questions. It's down to the individual. And you have to answer these two. Why am I doing this? And what's in it for me? And if you can customize training down to that level, then you're much, much more successful. So some frontline, some healthcare, you can't train them like an executive admin who has 8 calendars, the same as power users on finance with Excel. And so, right, you see what I'm saying? Customized training by agency, by mission, and by role have really made that fundamental change management and adoption over the years much, much more successful.
Interesting. Makes a lot of sense. Jeff, you want to talk about, I mean, we mentioned earlier, talking about government agencies using cloud to increase their agility, but also, security and disaster recovery are big parts of this as well. Do you want to talk about how Google Workspace can really help strengthen security? It's such an important issue these days.
I'd like to go back a little over 10 years ago. This is public knowledge, where Google potentially had a threat in one of its data centers. And it absolutely scared, of course, the engineers and the Google team. And so since then, what they created was something that we refer to as zero trust. And that was not coined by Google, by the way. But when you think of that, trust nothing. And so what I think is really interesting is this was used internally by Google and by Google employees for years and years, until about approximately 3 years ago, Google had made it commercially available for our customers. And so if you think of Beyond Corp as a way to look at that, it's beyond the corporation. So I have a zero trust in the infrastructure, but then I have to be able to get work done, and people have to find things and get to things, and I have to be able to integrate into other applications, which is the Beyond Corp, if you're following that. And I think the methodology behind it is it's a really big differentiator for Google. And I think why kind of a knock, maybe we haven't been in recent news for some of the things that you see with ransomwares and cybersecurity breaches and different things like that. And so, a way to explain it high level and quickly is, if you break it into 4 areas, one is the individual. What is the attributes about myself, right? What groups do I belong to? What organization am I in the company? What am I allowed to get connected to? What is it about me as the individual? And those are like all the attributes that pertain to me. And then the second is the device. So am I on a corporate device? Am I on a mobile device? Am I on a tablet? Am I on my neighbor's? Is it a PC? Is it a Mac? Is it a Windows? So everything about the device itself and all the attributes. And then what Google has done is think of a rules engine, because you have thousands of applications, and I have to map all of those. And then last but not least is a proxy. And that proxy, for every click, ready? Every single time these users take a click, it goes through all 4 things. Who am I? What are all the attributes? What time of day is it? What geolocation am I? What device am I on? Is it configured properly? What's the rules engine behind all those? Put a proxy in front, and then either authorize me or not. And so you can see it's a hop, skip, and jump, and it's a good story for us, and I think hopefully answers that question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Certainly zero trust has become a bigger conversation within public sector over the last couple of years. Interesting that Google's been working this way for quite a while, which probably is a great transition into our next question. As you start to think about the cloud providers you're going to partner with and you're going to work with, talk about the questions that agencies should be asking, of their potential partners around security and disaster recovery capabilities.
So when they ask their partners, I think the first thing that you'll hear is the questions they should be asking themselves, right? It's one of those where, as soon as you have your own health and well-being and your environment secure, then it's like, yes, now let's start looking at our partners. And it's interesting, because I think a lot of people I'm actually probably not a target. I actually don't have classified information. I installed a patch, and so, I'm good for now, right? There's a lot of that unfortunate mentality that does still exist today, versus maybe much more of a proactive mindset of, okay, let's really look at security in the sense of this, to start to answer your question, kind of a story. A CISO once told me, and I like this, is this: like, if you make security incredibly complicated, unfortunately, your users non-maliciously will find ways around it because they're going to do shadow IT. They're going to deploy certain applications to get their job done. Even though as a security professional, you're doing the right thing. You're just setting up the barriers and all the different layers of security, but you're making it hard to get to things and to get jobs done. If you make it as streamlined and simple, then of course your users will hopefully follow it. Yeah. That's what I would ask my partners if I'm a public sector agency is, how do you do security XYZ partner? Like, what is your history? How do you install applications? What do you go through for whitelisting different things? And again, like, what is your security posture and how do you measure it, right? And really, how do you, again, manage your overall infrastructure? And if you find that answer is complicated because they've got 15 different layers and a bunch of different vendors all in this layer stacked approach, I would say, hey, you're getting into more of a complicated situation than those companies that can tell you a very singular, succinct story. And it's not right. It's not a bunch of different vendors. It's really isolated down to one or just a few.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say those are questions that are going to be more and more important to agencies, right? I mean, as they grow their cloud use, they really do need to understand how their cloud providers are doing this, and like you said, making it easy for their users to operate securely.
It's easier said than done,
yeah.
As they say. But maybe one last thing from me, Steve, is just, look at the history of the companies. And, there are plenty of third-party and very reputable security and analytics companies that can tell you these companies have been breached. Some companies have multiple issues on a weekly basis, and then others don't. Others tend to be, because of the things we're talking about, I will say out loud, maybe less threatening and more secure than some other vendors. And again, it comes from that core infrastructure. It comes from not depending on third-party or supply chain type of things when it comes to your ISPs and your infrastructure and how you build your servers and what does your network look like. And that, maybe adding on to your earlier question there is like, what would you ask vendors and what do you supply or what do you rely on even for your own infrastructure use?
For agencies that are currently, operating on-prem or maybe in hybrid environments, Jeff, what advice do you have for them around successfully migrating to these more secure kind of cloud-based communication and collaboration platforms? You've done a lot of this transition. Talk about some of the lessons learned or, pieces of advice that might be helpful to these folks.
So yeah, I think hopefully the vendor and the partner community will appreciate this answer. I think this is good news. Guess what, Mrs. Customer, who's on-prem that's looking at adopting the cloud, there are very well-established companies and integrators out there that have done this hundreds and hundreds of times. They've gone through it. They've taken an environment seriously, almost probably identical to your size, with very close applications, with very close user needs. And so I would really rely, unfortunately, right, it's usually paid endeavors or paid projects. But that's where I'm like, you want to do it the right way, right? You don't want to maybe be your own contractor, build your house. You want to pay people to actually do it the right way, because the end result is going to be that much more successful. So the first part of the answer is, hey, rely on those corporations, rely on those partners, rely on those vendors that have done this multiple times and can prove it through their track record. And of course, please talk to their references and customers. There's, to me, no better way to prove success than leave the vendor out and go talk to the organization of your size that have done it. And then maybe more of a Google answer, it's metrics and analytics. You go through every agency, you go through all of the different applications that you have, you start to really, again, blueprint everything that they're doing, from the use cases to what they deliver, to what their mission is, to what, they're delivering down as these services, and you map it all, whether it's in a spreadsheet, right, or go a little bit more formal with an actual project management type of structure. And then you're able to analyze and go, you know what, maybe we don't do this whole big bang. Maybe we take chunks or pieces of our infrastructure or a certain agency or certain users and just take a methodical step to move to the cloud, and maybe a slower process than maybe all at once.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, that is good stuff. I appreciate you joining us as always. And thanks for the insight. These are great tips around some pretty important issues.
Well, that was very nice to say. Again, really good visiting and seeing you again. And, hopefully we can talk soon. And again, appreciate your time. And yeah, good seeing you. Thanks, Steve.